Hello, and welcome back for season 3 of Stories Across Borders. For those of you who are new to the show, here we discuss stories told across a range of different mediums books, movies, games, comics. If it's a way to tell a story, it's an option. The only rule is that we can only talk about things in terms of the writing. Anything like acting, animation, art, mechanics, etc., is off limits, unless it relates directly to how the story is being told. I'm Daniel Radford, author, drama queen, and also your host, and I am joined by my frequent co-conspirator, Jon Coenen.
Howdy. It's spooky season. I am not a ghost, although I do sometimes look like one.
Yeah, on that note, we're not doing horror, but we are going to be beginning this season in a very dramatic way. And I mean that literally, because the first season, this season, our first cycle theme is in fact drama.
We do love us some drama, and no, we're not here to talk about reality TV. Although
Or
it
to get
might
cancelled.
come up. God, please no.
We do, of course, have some fitting dramatic rain in the background. I don't know if you can hear that or not, but despite the fact it's the middle of spring now for me, the universe has decided actually it's winter.
Yeah, it's
So,
funny. Despite how much drama happens, I would say the universe isn't really all that great at actually orchestrating the drama. I mean, it's supposed to rain when someone dies. Someone's always dying, but it's not always raining. Unless you're in Ireland.
then it's always raining. Don't tell former guest on this podcast, Jay, we said that.
Oh, no.
But yeah, so to begin with, we're actually going to need to establish what we mean when we say our theme this cycle is drama. Because the concept of what a drama is dates all the way back to the ancient Greeks and their version of theatre, where drama was kind of just the catch all term for, well, all of theatre that wasn't poetry. And that, of course, was then subdivided again into comedies and tragedies. Comedies being stories with lighter, happy endings, and tragedies being stories built on suffering that end with more suffering.
Yeah, back then, nobody who wasn't into theater, for the most part, really cared to have dramatic stories at all. So it was a very easy thing to have as a genre.
I wouldn't say that I didn't like dramatic stories. I would argue that every tragedy is by default dramatic. It's just that back then, the term drama was the catch all for theatre. It was all drama.
Yeah, all I mean is, the theater was pretty much the only place to get fictional drama and not, all too real drama.
That's fair. The ancient Greeks were fond of the all too real kind of drama.
Oh, sure were, weren't they?
Looking at you, Athens. In a more modern context, though, surprisingly little has actually changed. Drama is still a very broad catch all term for a style of storytelling, which makes it really hard to narrow things down for the purposes of a podcast. You could technically define any story that adopts a more serious and non comedic tone as a drama. That is actually the broad strokes definition of drama in storytelling. It's just a non comedic serious story.
Yeah, and we didn't wanna just, leave it sitting at that because then it's like, "Oh, cool. What do you wanna cover for drama? Almost anything?"
Yes, I was gonna say, I think at a minimum of and again, that's just this, a minimum of half of all the stories ever told is a bit broad for a theme for a cycle, which does lead us to the need for a more specific definition. And for that, I actually think we can turn to books for some inspiration because literature doesn't really use the term drama as a genre descriptor very often. I do, but I'm weird. There is, however, a term in writing called literary fiction, which is also pretty broad and can mean a few things. But one of the things it can mean is a story that is one serious in tone, and two has a character centric plot, or is character centric rather than plot centric, I should say. And I actually think that's a really good definition for us to use for defining drama as a genre as well, at least for our purposes. A
I would say so.
story, yeah, a story that is serious in tone and built primarily around the human element rather than plot developments. Still very broad, but I think it does give us a little more to work with.
It definitely does, especially since we're not gonna be covering Friends. I don't care how many people feel dramatic about it.
Friends is very much a comedy.
It is a comedy. It's just also a comedy that loves to never shut up about the drama between its characters.
But I mean, that does actually bring me to something interesting, right? In that I feel like when you talk about drama stories, everyone is going to imagine something slightly different because it is such a broad thing. You've got your legal dramas, police procedurals are typically dramas, political dramas, romantic dramas, the teen quotation marks drama, the melodrama, soap opera. There is so many different things that people imagine when you talk about drama as a genre, and that's probably why it doesn't get used that much, really, is that it's because it's a super genre, it can mean so many different things.
Yeah, especially because it can even, like, parasitically attach it to other dramas, attach itself to other genres, or specifically even, like, topics or things like, for instance, you could just you just make something a medical drama just by, making a drama that happens to be about characters in a hospital, stuff like that. It's part of it being such a broad term is that as far as the cultural zeitgeist goes, but also individuals' brains, what it is also becomes fairly nebulous. It's hard for it to have a definite shape when, really, if you look at it in the broad strokes, it doesn't.
Yeah, so drama is actually what we call a super genre. To the best of my knowledge, there's only two of those: comedy and drama. And they, by definition, are always attached to something else because they're so broad.
They can't exist on their own, both because they're so broad and also because they don't actually create their own they can't create their own substance out of nothing but their own idea like other genres can either, I would say.
Yeah, well, describing something just as a drama actually tells you very little about what the story actually is, because as we have established, all it means is it's a serious story and it's character centric, which that's a lot of different stories.
Yeah, the same thing does, also apply to comedy. I've I've had plenty of things I've, watched with my fiancé that they ended up liking, but I had to not show them the preview thing because so many things that even try to make jokes get labeled as comedy, and, she has it in her head that she hates comedies. Everything she ever watched that was labeled a comedy and just told jokes all the time when she was a kid or a teenager, she absolutely hated. So, she's instantly gonna groan and write off anything you call a comedy.
Which is unfortunate because comedy is also a supergenre. And
Yeah.
that's an interesting thing, is that comedy and drama are arguably best defined in opposition to each other. There are very few things that exist outside of that dichotomy.
Yeah, they're not entirely antithetical to each other, but I would say they're very I don't know if frictitious is a word, but they build up friction against each other very easily.
Yeah, I mean, they don't have to be separate. Like we did a whole thing a while back where we talked about genre blending and how comedy and drama can actually mix together surprisingly well to create something very poignant. But by and large, they are defined in opposition. But we're not here to talk about that so much because there's only so much we can say on on the notion of comedy, drama, opposites. Because no shit. Um, but it does bring you back into what you said about how your fiance has this sort of visceral reaction to the label of comedy. A lot of people have that response to the label of drama.
That's true. I used to when I was younger.
Yeah, so did I. For a long time, I had in my head that I didn't like drama. Because when I was a kid, what drama meant to me was shitty Hallmark romance.
Yeah, because I mean, yeah, when I was a kid too, that was mainly the time people used drama. Like, oh my god, my new drama came out. It's like, oh my god, what happens? Oh, these teenagers, they like each other and stuff's going on, and it's hard. They're so cute. And I'm just like, okay, cool. I stopped listening 5 seconds in.
And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with romance as a genre or anything like that. Or that I've obviously grown up a lot more since then. I can respect it as a genre, at least if it's well written. But
Yeah, there are good ones. There's just a lot of bad ones.
this is a little bit bad. But for the longest time, I had this visceral reaction, and I think a lot of people have an idea in their head of what drama is. Either they think it means romance, or they think it means like soap opera melodrama, or they think it means like stuffy courtroom drama. And it's funny in a way because all of these things are drama.
They are. They are inherently drama. Those are all things where the drama is the main thing driving the plot.
In fact, I've learned that I actually love drama stories, as it turns out. Now that I've gotten older, I developed more of an understanding of what it actually means for a story to be a drama. Because by nature, they are character driven narratives. So by design, they should follow my golden rule of writing, and that is that to make your audience care about your plot, say it with me now, they need to care about your characters.
Oh, what are you talking about? This is a crazy new idea you're bringing up. I've never heard this
Yeah, I've
before.
I've never mentioned this before. Looked at every article I've ever written, every cycle of this podcast we've ever done. So now I think about it, and I'm sort of like, the idea of not liking drama at all feels antithetical to the idea of liking stories at all. Otherwise, it's just a list.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. It's not exactly the same thing, but it does remind me of things I've run into in my life that were like different versions of getting annoyed by oversaturation with something and being like, "Oh my god, this one thing is everywhere. I can't get away from it. I hate it." And then later being like looking back and being like, "Huh, why did I have a problem with that again? Of course it's everywhere. Why wouldn't it be?"
Yeah, as long as stories exist, and they will exist for as long as sentience exists, there is going to be drama because characters drive stories. I said it earlier, just a couple minutes ago, if that. A story without drama, even if it's a comedy, is just a list of events. The thing that makes a story interesting is how characters respond to those events, and that is, by definition, drama.
Yeah, I mean, and not just that, like the things that drive people towards stories and the whole for the most part and the whole reason we care about characters and their growth and development, that's also inherently dramatic. Like nobody likes a perfect character or a Gary Stu or whatever. Like, well, the things that make them not that are their flaws and mistakes and the ways they change, which are all drama.
Yeah, exactly. The things that drive a character forward and a story forward are what we call drama. So, if nothing else, what I want people to take away from this episode in particular is this idea that you don't dislike drama, you dislike a specific subset of it, perhaps, because drama is just so, as we've said several times already, broad.
Yeah. It's okay to say you don't like drama in real life, though. I don't blame you if you say that.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. But how the things we like in fiction, we rarely would want for ourselves in reality. How many of us are like, hell yeah, serial killer movie, but would rather not be stabbed?
I love Sweeney Todd so much. I don't think I would go have a drink with him, though.
No, definitely not. This brings us to some interesting points of discussion we can look into now, because we can look at all the different types of subcategory of drama there are, and I'm sure we'll note they all have the basic tendencies of drama in common, we can also consider what makes for good drama versus bad drama, and perhaps look into perhaps why some of us for a long time, and some even still now, have such a visceral reaction to the idea of a dramatic story. So just to again, we already listed a few earlier on, but I want to illustrate just one more time just how diverse dramatic storytelling actually is. Because you've got melodramatic stories, you've got the dramatic wind blowing my curtains and stuff in the background that I wish would stop. You've got soap operas, medical dramas, legal dramas, political dramas. Police procedurals are drama.
That's true.
You've got romantic dramas, dramedies, which combine with comedy. And
God,
then, of course,
I can never hear or think about dramedy without just thinking about the fucking the old Billy and Mandy scene where where you have the Grim Reaper himself just saying, "It's drama and comedy. It's a dramedy, and it's art. It's a dramedy fart." And I don't know why that lives. I didn't think it was funny at the time, and I don't think it's funny now, and it still lives rent free in my head forever.
some things just do that.
It's just a brain worm forever.
And that's the thing as well. Like going to the drama also just be inserted into other things. It is a part of most action stories, for example, because action is another thing which, like drama, is very hard to tell on its own. It has to be attached to something else, otherwise it's just a series of events.
Yeah.
There is very few things that I feel like exist outside of the comedy or drama labels. I think the only thing I would safely say is a lot of horror.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's not like by default. Horror can obviously be combined with drama or comedy quite well, but I don't think it necessarily fits our definition of a drama, even if it does perhaps the broader idea of just non-comedic storytelling, because it is very much based on the plot a lot of the time. Doesn't have
Yeah,
to be.
and horror might also be the only genre that, like, there's a lot of good horror stuff does have drama or comedy, but I think it might be the only genre that never needs it. Like, horror can just be horror without having any, like, interpersonal drama or most kinds of genre or any comedy, although it's really easy for horror to be funny anyways, which is why a lot of people like horror even knowing that a lot of it's not very good.
Yeah, I mean, because a lot of horror, even good horror, lacks being character centric. One of our like foundational pillars of what we consider a drama, going by our definition, right? That's not to say
Yeah,
there is no character growth or character drama or whatever. You start to be invested in characters to care what happens to them,
especially
and that's
psychological horror where everybody doesn't just have to die.
yeah. I mean, that's where a lot of slashers sort of fall flat is that you're really just in it for the gore and the spectacle. That's why they bring kind of hollow all the time. You don't really care what happens to the characters; they just meet. But
Yeah,
it's just an interesting thing to note that a lot of horror does exist outside that dichotomy, and it's one of the few things that really can. Not not to say it
yeah.
always does. I would argue that something like It
Oh, yeah.
is very much also a drama because it is severely, that doesn't seem right, seriously character centric.
It spends a long time just being a drama or not a long time, I should say a lot of time because it's not all at once. A big chunk of that movie is spent just being drama, and even when the horror stuff comes in, it is driven by the drama, especially considering it is literally a manifest the avatar of fear as a human concept.
Yeah, it's its very existence is rooted in the actual day-to-day drama of these characters' lives because that's where their experiences, their loves, their fears come from. And I think
Spoiler
this.
alerts, by the way, for one of Stephen King's oldest, most famous stories. It's older than either of us on this podcast. I'm sorry if you're upset by that.
uh, yeah, it's stronger for it. The drama makes the horror stronger, and I feel like we talked about this a lot as well when we talked about dramedies, like when we did Everything's Gonna Be Okay, for example. Oftentimes, highlighting the dramatic elements of a story only make its oppositional elements hit harder and vice versa.
Weaponized emotional whiplash.
That's one way to put it, yeah. And that's kind of what all these different types of story have in common, right? Like we if we take say a legal drama, like a courtroom drama, your I'm gonna
Oh, no, I'm suddenly forgetting what it's called. God, it's literally one of the most famous, like,
I mean
drama shows of
um,
all time, and I can't remember it.
Jag.
Law& and Order.
Law and Order is an interesting one because it's half legal drama and half police procedural.
That's true.
But both halves, actually, it's a really good example of this because it's both. Both halves are inherently character centric, although one is more plot driven than the other, perhaps. Or even the plot beats in the police procedural element and also in the courtroom half of Law and Order are very much rooted in the characters, in their interactions with each other, in how each case makes them feel. I think Law and Order is actually a really good example because I mean, I for someone who's not even 30 yet, I've watched a lot of this show. And
Honestly, a lot of people have. I need to watch it at some point so that whenever I think about that kind of show, the only thing that pops into my head isn't Futurama spoofing it with its little single female lawyer jokes.
but a lot of the a lot of the tension comes not just from the mystery of oh who did it, although that is certainly a part of it, but a lot of the
Sir, it's who done it.
anyway, a lot of the a lot of the intensity of the plot actually comes from the impact dealing with these cases has on the police who are investigating them. This is especially true in SVU. They go all in on that, oddly enough, given the nature of the crimes. But and I do think that it would be a much less compelling show to watch if the cops were what you would expect from actual cops, or at least hope for actual cops of being professional all the time, just all cold professionalism. The fact that we get to see the emotional impact these cases have on them, often at times where they really should be keeping their game face on, makes it much more engaging TV and storytelling.
That's a good way to go about it, actually, yeah. On and off duty.
Exactly, and it's exactly the same in the courtrooms and in every courtroom you've seen in TV and a movie just about. The emotions are all heightened. You've got lawyers shouting objections and getting deeply invested in their cases and intense cross examinations and things like that. That isn't really what a courtroom in actual life looks like. It's all dialed up, all much more rooted in how the characters are feeling, because that makes us connect more with the story because we care about the asshole going to jail. We care about the suspiciously corrupt lawyer on the defense side, who would probably just be a guy in reality, not getting away with the cover up. We care about these hero cops and lawyers who we support wholeheartedly because they're our protagonists succeeding in putting the bad guy away and bringing justice to that crying victim on the stands. And all of that is because we are experiencing character drama, because everything is heightened enough and that sort of veneer of real world professionalism is largely stripped away. It is
True.
very much the drama that makes us care about those stories and those characters. Because, I mean, real world courts are boring for most people.
Yeah. Yeah, they are, and it oh.
it's a real world court. It's more like, Your Honor, as you can see, the witness did the bad because of X and Y, as opposed to objection, motherfucker. you know,
Yeah, especially because in real life, evidence doesn't show up in the middle of courtroom proceedings for one
it
thing.
literally can't.
It's not guess what? If for it to be admissible in court, it's gotta be submitted ahead of time, which is the biggest the this isn't relevant since it's a goofy, silly little video game and not that dramatic, but that's the biggest thing people
Ace
always
Attorney,
laugh
yeah.
at about Ace Attorney.
Yeah, I mean, Ace Attorney is very funny because, Phoenix is constantly doing things that a lawyer absolutely cannot do.
No, and so are other people, like, people just being like, "Alright, here's here's this evidence that you didn't know about, sir, and also, according to the autopsy report," and you're just like, "Wait, I never read an autopsy report," and then Phoenix is like, "Oh, yeah, the autopsy report," and you're like, "Wait, you didn't tell me about the autopsy report?"
But yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic, even if it's way more of a comedy than a drama.
I do
I
love
think
it.
it is a fantastic example of exactly what we're talking about, how heightened a courtroom is on TV or in a movie, or even in a book to an extent, although I think less so perhaps in books, because they have other ways of going into how characters are feeling other than what is shown explicitly on screen. They can talk about what's going on in a character's head, especially like TV and film. The courtroom is heightened so much. The police behavior is, well, it's dampened down in some ways and heightened in others to make them a lot more heroic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's you only see so much heroism in real life.
But like you look at again, like with SVU and how invested those characters get in every single case, which are always horrifying cases, sure, but that's a degree of unprofessionalism that would not be acceptable from real life police officers.
No, that level of consistent emotional attachment is like,
A
no,
hindrance, if anything.
normally in a lot of stories, it's an overblown thing, but this is one of those things where it's like, no, actually in real life, people would say that and they'd be 100% right.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing that emotional, and it's not just Law and Order as well. It's like cop shows in general, police procedurals in general. That emotional investment that our heroes have in cases that makes them so good at their job, in reality, would be the thing that made them terrible at their job. Because you
Like,
need objectivity to properly investigate a crime.
yeah, you're doing your best, and that's great. You seem a little compromised.
Just a bit. But
But
that's why
yeah,
we
I
love
mean,
them.
that's what makes them stories.
It's what makes them so engaging is that the characters have this dramatic response to everything.
Yeah, it's part of why most of the time when you hear about real stories like that, you're not hearing about what the lawyers or the cops or the investigators did. You're just hearing about like the crimes themselves or the regular people involved on the sidelines.
Yeah, I mean that is exactly why a news story focuses primarily on the victim, because that's where the emotion is and that's what hooks an audience and gets them reading the news article. It's
Ah,
where
yes,
that sweet, sweet
news.
advertising money comes from.
Another one of those jobs and areas of media we look to that very much should be objective and about the facts, and might be the least objective about the facts thing ever in most cases nowadays.
Yeah, it's only gotten worse. We talked about just now, very briefly, I touched on that drama in books can be displayed differently.
Oh yeah,
Then, and I think that's actually something worth discussing because whilst we talk about how openly, visually, and sonically, I guess, auditorily, I don't know, dramatic moments are displayed in film TV. whilst in text format they can still be like that, you can get a subtler kind of drama in written form because you are often provided a much more direct window into the inner thoughts of characters. Whether that's because it's a first person story and you are literally hearing them, or because you are dealing with an omniscient narrator who is able to just tell you straight up, this character is feeling X.
Yeah, and because no matter how good you are at descriptive language, on top of that, people just literally will not have the same reactions to having to think about and imagine something that they will to seeing it right in front of them.
Yeah, an audience is not as good at reading between the lines as either authors or audiences like to think they are.
No,
That's one of the
definitely
reasons
not.
I always have a problem with the advice of show don't tell because there is very much a time for both.
Yeah, sometimes at the same time.
Yeah, and it's like you can definitely show a character's feelings, don't get me wrong. In fact, it is often better that you do, but sometimes within context, it just makes more sense to state something explicitly, especially in a first person narrative, because there is no reason why a first person narrator wouldn't be thinking about how the events in the story make them feel.
Yeah, and I honestly, I think that's one of the reasons why, like, mysteries have always been, like, a literary dominant genre and kinda always will be, because I think for the most part, things like describing things in that kinda detail and telling you things about, like, a stray twitch of someone's face when they hear a word and stuff like that, little hints like that, are inherently, like, way more inquisitive when you are reading and having to think about it yourself than when you are watching it.
I mean, mysteries are still huge in film and TV too. So
Yeah, I just mean, like, when it comes to, like, the show versus tell and, like, the descriptive language thing, like, they it's one of those things that gets communicated very differently in different mediums, and I think that's why that's one of the genres, at least, that will never, like, come close to dying out in books and stuff, because I'm, for the most part, not gonna be thinking about every twitch of someone's face when it happens on screen, even when someone says something that's important. But you mention it a book, and suddenly I've thought about it, I've imagined it, and emotionally, that probably didn't make me feel anything, but it did get me thinking about something.
well, that's because it's the difference between text and subtext. In a book, it's literally text. Your attention has been drawn to it because it's been written on the page. It has been forcibly inserted into your brain that this event happened. Whilst when it happens on screen, it is entirely dependent on your ability to notice it unless a character actively points it out.
Yeah,
And that's sometimes that's a strength, more than a weakness, to be fair. But it's also getting out of the realm of drama and more into specifically mystery storytelling, so
valid.
probably better not to focus on it too much. But
Yeah,
I definitely did wanna look into that sort of difference, right, between the written medium and the visual, because the way that you write drama in a book compared to in film and TV is different because in a book, you don't have to be quite as explosive and melodramatic to communicate these things and get people invested in characters because of that direct line of like comprehension from characters' feelings to reader's brain because it's told to you, which is
yeah,
something that would come across weird in a movie or a TV series if someone just turned to the screen and went, "And this made me sad." Unless you had like some narration over the top, I guess. But even then, it's not really necessary because you are connecting with a visible, visual human emotion.
yeah, and the barrier between text and subtext is so much more defined and obvious in the written form than it is visual and sound.
Then you have games come into that as well, which is an interesting one for how it's communicated because it depends largely on the game and the way it is built. Because video games can be so many different things mechanically and stylistically. You can communicate it much more like a TV show or a movie in something like, say, The Last of Us, one of my favorite series. The game and the TV show are not that different in how they do things because they can communicate the drama in the same way. It's a very cinematic game. But then you have other things where there's maybe no voice acting and it has to be communicated almost entirely via the animations on screen and in the text.
Yeah, and you also have, like, then I would say then you also have the big divide with video games of whether, like, the drama, not just the drama, but in this case, the drama is being presented to you in a way that is a question where they want to see what your answer is, or whether they are directly guiding you down a path of trying to make you feel a certain way because that's what the narrative is going for or what is gripping and what you're being pulled towards.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. The element of agency can definitely very as it can with most things, can have a very strong impact on how you were affected by the drama because either you are watching it as an observer or you are an active part of it. I touched upon this way back when I did the cycle of horror. I sort of said games might be the ideal medium to tell a horror story because the fact you have to actively interact with it and as a participant makes it all the more real. And I wouldn't go quite as far as to say the ideal medium for drama, but I think it can also definitely play a part in having the drama hit you harder in certain scenarios, certainly because you are an active participant in the drama in a lot of games.
Yeah, the drama can be aimed directly at you. That's a part of why games like Telltale's The Walking Dead, like, exploded so much.
Yeah, because you are the protagonist of the story then. You are inhabiting an individual, not just watching as a third party.
Yeah, huh, I cried a little.
Entirely valid.
Clementine, Clementine is my precious daughter, and nothing will hurt her ever until I have to play as her, and then, oh my god, she's hurting, this is awful, and I wanna cry again.
Um, I mean, that is the other thing as well, is that, one of the fun things about drama being so character-centric is that as we shift perspectives, we find ourselves feeling differently because of, well, empathy.
Yeah, yeah, it changes completely, and, like, the same thing happens in other mediums, but I guess it's very different in that it is much more literally your perspective in a game than it is in other things. In other things, it is still your perspective by virtue of it being what you are seeing, but also you're not the one driving it forward or participating or doing anything. You are literally perceiving it and nothing else.
Exactly, and speaking of your perspective, I think this is a very good time now that we're like talking about drama in individual mediums to actually bring this full circle and talk about something that we don't touch upon very often in this podcast, even though arguably we should. Theater,
Yeah,
and it is kind of full circle because that's where it all started, and it's even where the term drama comes from. Ancient Greek theater, where drama was just everything,
true.
and I mean, it's a very different storytelling medium. The drama has to be very overblown on the stage because otherwise the audience can't hear it.
Yeah, like, a lot of people in the audience are literally sitting far away, for one thing.
So we talk about drama being heightened in like a court drama or whatever. That is exponentially true in a lot of ways for things you see on stage, while you have these very melodramatic performances because the only way to get that emotion across to the people in the back row is to shout it half the time. Especially back in like earlier eras when we didn't have the mic setups or things like that. We were just dependent entirely on acoustics.
Yep. Thank God for amphitheaters. Science.
Exactly. And it's funny because one of the things that that makes it so hard for me to connect to, like, soaps and things like that is that very overdramatic melodrama style, right? Which has its origins in theater. The very thing that makes it easier for the audience in the back to connect to the drama on stage by virtue of being so overblown is the same thing that makes it difficult for a lot of us to connect to the drama in a soap, especially in the most modern context when we have been exposed to a much more evolved TV and film atmosphere at this point in time, where we are much more used to more subtle kinds of drama.
Yeah, that's true. Melodrama is a form of story communication born through limitations, which makes it feel very different in any medium without those same limitations.
Yeah, it's fascinating how the change in medium has an influence on how we respond to melodrama, and how shifting from stage to screen changes it from this is the reason I can connect to the story at all to good God, no one would have this reaction.
Yeah. Why are all these people so hyperbolic?
Realistic responses are much more integral to believable drama in a book and in the screen because we don't have to worry about literal, actual physical difference being a factor.
Yeah, like you gotta put the effort in and put all that emphasis in the theater for it to be seen, for it to be heard, for it to be felt when it's literally being transmitted right to your face and ears right in front of you. It's an entirely different context which completely changes the rules of the game as some stories refuse to acknowledge.
Well, I mean, the reason that a lot of especially old soaps and things like that are like that is because TV was new. So we were still directing and writing stories with the same theatrical mindset.
Yeah, it was just theater on a camera.
And over the decades that followed, people started to realize that even though it's not in person, because have a much closer view of the characters and a much more like direct perception of their voices and their audio cues and all this stuff, that you actually have a lot more of an intimate connection with the character on screen than you do with the one on stage a lot of the time.
Yeah, and hyperbole is the enemy of intimacy.
Exactly. And good drama should feel intimate. You want it. The best drama comes from when you feel like you are a witness to an important moment in a character's life, like you are on the scene for this thing that is happening, that is having this big emotional impact on the character. Things that take you out of that rather than add to the drama can lessen it. It's why I have a problem. I struggle with a lot of musicals for this reason. Because on top
Yeah,
of being just very big, overblown, dramatic storytelling a lot of the times, when people start singing in the middle of a big dramatic moment, it completely removes me from the narrative, and I become very aware of the fact I'm watching a show. It has to be a damn good musical to manage to, not screw with me like that.
that's true. You're actually making me realize that, yeah, that's because I love I love singing and songs and stuff, so I've always, not to make it sound like a gender, but I've always identified as someone who likes musicals, even though thinking about it, there are a ton of musicals I've seen over the years that I'm just like, "Eh." And, like, 'cause I think about it sometimes, like, Sweeney Todd, one of the songs starts, I get hype. The few times I've been sitting down in front of a TV where, High School Musical plays and all of the students start jumping on tables in the cafeteria and singing and dancing and stuff, I'm immediately out of it.
Yeah. God, those are two very different musicals. I think an except like a good exception for the rule, I think, is like rock operas because they are almost entirely music.
It is actually the story being told to you through music. It's different. It's not music inserting into the story. It is the story. It's a type of ballad,
Exactly.
really.
And I do think that big like that very overblown nature of stage performance, right, is why we like people still love theater, but I feel like finding people who love theater is more and more a rarity because in a lot of ways that very overblown storytelling feels strange to us, the generations that have grown up with TV style drama.
That and unfortunately, it's also, like, a financial thing too, because everything else over time is becoming more and more accessible and theater is becoming less.
Also true. Partly probably because it's less popular.
I'd be going to theater performances all the time if I could afford it and it was easy to get to the only decent theater that's within 10 or 15 miles of me.
Yeah, that's fair. But it is definitely an interesting thing to note how over time our relationship with drama has evolved and changed. Partly because of the medium it is told through. Because again, we had like theater, which was what it was, and I feel like interestingly, like we haven't talked a lot about radio dramas.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
part of that is just that I don't have a lot of experience with the idea of a radio drama. The
I know
closest
TV is
thing
older than us too, but radio dramas are so far ahead of our time. Like most of my context for radio dramas is the stuff I've heard about the very first ones, a couple jokes made in a bunch of stuff I've watched, and Fallout.
I think TV actually came before radio, weirdly, now that I
Oh,
mention it as well. I feel like we've had this discussion before. I'm in real-time Google double check this. What came first, TV or radio? Okay, so radio did come first in the 20s, and then TV started in some countries in the 30s, but then got really popular in the 50s.
especially because much like radio, when TV first started happening, it was immediately a practical thing first. 'Cause there weren't a lot of them, they weren't everywhere, and there weren't a lot of channels, so for the most part, TV was like a news broadcast machine at first.
Oh, but it was I see, but commercial radio may have come after TV.
Huh, I wouldn't have thought.
I'm not totally certain. This is some very quick googling I'm doing here. I should have researched. This is one of the things I just slipped my mind to research beforehand. Either way, there's definitely a lot less separation between the two. But I would definitely be interested in going back almost and seeing if radio dramas suffered from the same problem that TV dramas did with that stage to screen mentality, or if they managed to bypass that because it sounds directly to your ears because they understood that closeness would be there, or if it's or if it's more heightened in some ways because there are no visual cues.
I think in a way it's a similar thing other than being purely sound. I would say I think the radio drama thing, at least from the small amount of radio drama stuff I've heard, um, leans a lot closer to staying theater than the other mediums do because, I mean, not to bring out Fallout again, because I know it's not a real old radio show, it makes me think of Fallout 3 and Herbert Daring Dashwood talking about his wonderful journeys and exploits, and everybody in the story is talking like this. Or the dramatic Penelope Chase, who's always talking about, what's going on, and has to be like, oh, Herbert. It has the same kind of over the top melodrama to get the feelings across because you are getting so much less information
John
beamed straight to
actively
you.
using my podcast as an excuse to expand his highlight reel.
Listen, I've just listened I've listened to Galaxy News Radio and Fallout 3 a lot, okay? I've heard all of the Herbert Daring Dashwood things 50 times each minimum.
I was the closest I've come to like real much like actual experience with the idea of radio dramas is when I was like 10, I think. As part of school, we got to listen to some chunks of the like original War of the Worlds broadcast. You know, the infamous one that had
Oh,
been
man,
managed
I
that had been
still need to
preserved or
go sit
something.
down and actually listen to that.
And I have the vaguest recollections of it. So to be honest, but I remember like it being like narrated by this deep voice. I mean, it sounded deep to me at the time. I was 10, maybe I'm misremembering it, but if that even. But I do feel like it was less overblown than stage acting in a lot of ways. But that could also be because the way it was framed was like a news broadcast.
That's a big part of it for sure. It was a lot more point A to point B, here for a specific goal, not to tell a story.
I mean, it was to tell a story. It's just the way it was framed was interestingly done, you know.
Well, yeah, because like, I guess you could say when they started actually telling stories, they only had 2 things to go off of. They could
Yeah,
either make it like theater, which they weren't doing quite yet for the most part, or they could make it like the other TV that already existed, which was pretty much just news broadcasts.
fair point. It's interesting because in so many ways, the way we present drama has changed. Like the way drama is presented in literature is largely unchanged because the medium's pretty much exactly the same. But jumping from like old school radio dramas and stage to TV to modern TV and film, the way we present drama has evolved to be a lot more subtle and believable and intimate, and I think has benefited a lot from that. But the core idea of drama as what it is, as being the serious character centric model of storytelling, hasn't changed that much from when the Greeks were doing it. It's it's interesting that the idea of dramatic storytelling conceptually hasn't evolved that much, just how we communicate it.
Nah, big events, big feelings, big impact, and throw it at you, make you feel these things.
Yeah, and that's the crux of it is basically just giving secondhand feelings to the audience based on the events that are happening on the page or in the screen or on stage or whatever. It is drama is the emotional storytelling in a lot of ways. It would be a good way to highlight it compared to comedy, which can have dramatic moments for sure, but by and large, the purpose is just to make you laugh. It's comedic. Or horror when it chooses to exist outside the dichotomy, which is just to make you shit your pants. Um,
Yeah, comedy also makes you feel things, but I don't know. I don't know if I feel when something is funny as much as I have the reaction and then I have the positive feeling of having had that interaction. Like, I don't know. Maybe everybody experience everything's differently, but I think when something is funny, I'm definitely not just feeling entertained and haha funny nearly as much as drama is directly making me feel things and emotions.
yeah, and it's versatile and complex and deep because dramatic stories they don't just make you feel sad necessarily. They can make you happy or angry or scared or fill you with existential dread or so many other things because again drama is one of the super genres. It is always attached to other things. It is such as it is a broad all-encompassing element of storytelling. Every story, even comedies, even horrors, will probably have some degree of drama in it
Yeah, it's an inherent part of the human experience that you can't get away from, and that means it's also gonna bleed into everything fictional or entertainment because humans humans are all about context and patterns in our brains for the most part, even when we're failing to follow patterns or failing to read context, which means everything that's gonna be entertaining or really draw you in has to at least have some aspect of the things that entertain you and draw you in real life or make you feel things, which means you're not going to be able to escape it in fiction. It's going to be different, but uh, that's where it is. That's what it has to be to entertain people.
It is the human element. It is the part of the story that makes us care about the story.
And if you say you don't care about drama, you're wrong.
Yeah, you're either wrong or lying to us or to yourself. Doesn't matter, one of the two. And that is more than anything what I wanted to get across with this specific episode, is this idea that a lot of people are misunderstanding what drama is in storytelling. They have this preconceived notion that drama is melodrama or is romance or is stuffy courtroom or whatever, when in reality, drama is storytelling. Every story has at least a little drama in it. It's just a sliding scale of how much.
Yep. Everything from the greatest Broadway show to the biggest blockbuster to sitting around a campfire with some friends.
Indeed. In fact, I would posit to you, audience, that you are, in fact, all fans of drama. It just may be that you have a preference for the form it takes.
And that's okay. You like what you like. No need for us to be dramatic about that.
And with that incredibly cheesy endpoint, that is, in fact, where we are going to call this episode. As always, you can find these episodes on my website, radfordwrites.com, as well as assorted stories, both written and audio, blog articles, and the like, links to my assorted things. You can buy my books there, which I very much would appreciate. And soon, I mean, it may already be out, depending on how how the schedule goes, but soon there will be other podcasts and podcast adjacent material there as well. Uh,
Hmm.
and of course, you can find John streaming on Twitch as Sephir, Sephear, and VODs going up on YouTube, I'm sure.
Yes, and I'm gonna start trying to work more on like learning editing and actually try to be ready to really make videos because I have learned the hard way that streaming being an active live thing is fun and enjoyable, but also pretty hardly pulls on my problem with getting out of bed to do things if it's not to make money or do something I immediately know is already paying off. It's so much harder to motivate myself. I hate it, but at least if I know if I start getting making videos and stuff, I can, I can tell myself, well, I'm gonna play a game for a little while, and then it will be content later after I play, instead of having to get myself to be like, all right, it's time to get up and do the thing.
Well, until the next time we do the thing, uh, goodbye.
Toodles.